No. So think back, like ancient history last week, right? So we started this lecture based on the book, and then we stopped at verse 11, John 8:11. And so then we took a little excursus into that story of the woman caught in adultery. We talked about that. You did some questions, and then we had a lecture. So now we're going back to John 8. What is after beginning at verse 12, right? So now this title obviously is the ignorance of the Pharisees, and a lot of times when the book uses the term, it uses the word ignorance, I take a little bit of exception with that. Because it's pejorative, which means it's a put down, right? And sometimes it's not appropriate. They just didn't know. They weren't. In this case, these are the Jewish leaders. These are the people who know the Torah backward and forward, and they know all about Messiah. They know all the prophecies about Messiah, but they are ignorant of who he is. And so I think that term is probably pretty accurate for them. So in these verses that we're going to look at, verses 13 through 52, I doubt we'll get done today. In these verses, there's this contrast between Christ and the religious leaders. And Christ is wise and he is gentle, and the Pharisees are harsh and ignorant. Quite. They do not understand. And so we see this ignorance displayed in a number of ways. At least 8 times when the Pharisees were speaking to Jesus, they spoke as though they had no clue about their own history, about God, about things that they should have known. So the first thing is that they were ignorant of his truthfulness, his meaning Jesus, right? So their ignorance of the truthfulness of Christ. And I'm going to read, it says, I don't know, 18, I'm going to read 12 and 13. Again, Jesus spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. So the Pharisees said to him, you are bearing witness about yourself. Your testimony is not true. Now, we'll get to that in a minute. So they're saying, you're not telling the truth, right? So they are ignorant of his truthfulness. I want to talk about this just a little bit. He's already said during the whole water pouring thing of in the tabernacles and the Feast of the Tabernacles, which is looking forward to Messiah, he's already said, I'm fulfilling this. Now he's going to say that he is the light of the world, or the light of life, or the light of the world. Look, in Isaiah it says that in Israel there is a great light, and it is talking about, that whole passage is talking about Messiah. These guys knew those passages. They knew that Messiah would bring light and life, and he's saying that, and it isn't that they're like I don't know how to put it. They're being willfully ignorant of what he's saying. Either he's Messiah or he's not, but they're acting like they don't even understand what he's saying, and they should. They should. So they're ignorant of his truthfulness. They're basically accusing Jesus of lying about who he is. In claiming to be Messiah, he is lying. But Jesus replies, and remember, you had to have 2 witnesses, right, in a court of law, in a Jewish court of law. You couldn't just have one. And so they're saying, you're testifying about yourself. That's not a proper testimony. You need 2. And so Jesus replied that it's not just he who is testifying. that the Father also is testifying. And that's what we're going to get to next. So God is a witness to his messiahship. He's also going to say that his miracles are as well. So their ignorance of Christ's Father, of God, the Father. They said to him, therefore, where is your Father? Jesus answered, you know neither me nor my Father. If you knew me, you would know my Father also. They did not understand that he had been speaking to them about the Father. So John is saying they were ignorant about the Father. The Pharisees thought that Jesus was referring to his actual Father, his well, not so biological Father. Now, the curriculum says that they're basically saying that he was an illegitimate child, that he was Mary's son, but not Joseph's son. But we have no idea how much they knew about his birth family, right? About his situation. They were in Bethlehem when that happened, and they were in Nazareth for his childhood. So how much anyone knew about when Joseph and Mary got married and when Mary got pregnant, we don't know. I think they probably thought that he was talking about his earthly father, but I don't know that they knew anything more than that or knew who his father was. But either way, they're not understanding what Jesus is saying to them, and they certainly aren't believing it. So then, John then interjects this verse that says that he was in the treasury of the temple in that area. By the way, and that was back in chapter 7, verse 20 that he told us that. By the way, that is a mark of an eyewitness. When you give details, that shows truthfulness. That shows that it's something that you were an eyewitness of. Generally, when people aren't eyewitnesses, they give sort of broad. Think of your history book, right? Your history book has a lot of information in it, but does it give really great detail? Does it say, like, for example, what Lane Allen Dutton did in World War I? That's my grandfather. No. I know he lied about his age so he could go to war. But he did. He was 17, not 18, and he went. But if we could bring my grandfather back and talk to him, what would he say about the war? Very personal, detailed description of what he experienced. Why? Because he was an eyewitness. And so this little detail when in John 7, when he says that he was in the temple treasury, was speaking these things, that's an earmark of an eyewitness. So we're going to talk about the temple for just a little bit. And so this is the temple and then the outer court, but the temple itself. So all of it's the Temple Mount, but the temple itself was this part here, and we're going to go through the parts of the temple. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but this is the temple building, and then we've got the east gate coming in to the temple area, and then we've got the gate beautiful coming into the temple building itself, and then we've got the Nicanor gate that goes from that court that we're going to talk about in a little bit into the holy place where the sacrifices took place. And so each of these gates led to a special place in the temple. So the east gate led into the Gentile court. Anyone could go in there. Men, women, Jews, non-Jews, anyone could go there. And then the gate beautiful led into the what was called the women's court. Now, men and women could come into that court, but Gentiles could not. Gentiles could only be in that outer court, that Gentile court. And then the Nicanor gate led into the priest's court. Only the priest could come into that area. Certainly no women. Men could line like the outer 5 feet of it, but they couldn't go all the way in. Only the priests could go, could approach the altar in the priest's court, in that holy place. And then, of course, beyond that, there was the most holy place, the Holy of Holies, as it's sometimes called. So where is Jesus in the story? He's where is the treasury, the temple treasury? He was blocked off in a corner of the women's court. It's right here. So, there's the altar. So in the women's court, he was blocked off in this corner. It makes even more interesting how he was able to get out of that situation after he ticked people off again. So he was in the temple treasury, and it was this closed-in area in a corner of the women's court in the temple. And so, as we said, the people listening, the Pharisees listening, didn't understand. But now that I've called them ignorant a number of times, I want to say this. They couldn't understand. In fact, even his disciples didn't understand until he rose from the dead. And they also couldn't arrest him yet. They couldn't arrest him because it wasn't his time yet. So, the next part is ignorance of his destiny, of what he is going to do. So he said to them again, I am going away, and you will seek me, and you will die in your sin. Where I am going, you cannot come. So the Jews said, will he kill himself, since he says, where I am going, you cannot come? In Judaism of that day, suicide was an unforgivable sin. For the record, I do not believe it is. We'll go into details about that some other time, but I don't believe it is. I'll just say this. If I sin and then die without repenting of that sin, am I going to hell? I'm not saved by anything I do or I don't do. I'm saved by what Christ has done. You're saved by grace. So now I know there are Christians that disagree with what I just said, and that's something about which Christians can disagree. It is all within the bounds of orthodoxy. But that's my take on it. But they say, is he going to kill himself? Thinking, well, he's going to kill himself and he's going to go to hell. Certainly, we can't go to hell. And so that's their reasoning about this. And so they don't understand what he's saying. And the Pharisees willingly refused to believe that he was the Messiah. They were refusing the truth. And when that happens, nothing makes sense. Everything is nonsense when we refuse. Silly as well. And if you're one of these people, I'm sorry. But you know the flat earthers, right? Right? Doesn't matter what evidence you give them. You refuse. So they believe something that's nonsense, right? So he ends up concluding that that person ends up concluding that Jesus cannot be who he says he is. And then the next one is ignorance of his identity, of who he is, of who Christ is. I told you that you would die in your sins, for unless you believe that I am he, meaning I am Messiah, you will die in your sins. So they said to him, who are you? Jesus said to them, he might have been a little bit exasperated at this point, because he's been telling them over and over again. Just what I have been telling you from the beginning. And so they ask him, who are you? And Jesus really doesn't answer them. says, listen, right? There have been times as a teacher where I have said something clearly, and I get a hand, and that student asks me what I just said, right? And I'm like, well, maybe pay attention. You'll know. And that's kind of what Jesus is saying. I've already told you that. So he didn't answer that. And so I'm gonna. Yeah. So he continues, and in verse 26 and 27, he kind of tags on that. He says, "I have much to say about you and much to judge, but he who sent me is true, and I declare to the world what I have heard from him." They did not understand that he had been speaking to them about the Father, so they still don't understand. He continues to talk about it. He even says that he's talking about him, and that he has the right to speak and to judge, but they don't get it. They don't understand what he's talking about. And again, how could they? His own disciples didn't fully understand. Now, this is where it gets interesting. They were ignorant of their own history. Now, as we read this, I want you to figure out what they say, what the Pharisees say, what the Jewish leaders say that is obviously incorrect. Okay? So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed him, "If you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." They answered him, "We are the offspring of Abraham, and have never been enslaved to anyone. How is it that you say you will become free?" Jesus answered them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever. The son remains forever. So if the son sets you free, you will be free." There was a Jewish custom, and also a Roman custom, that if there were slaves, and by the way, slavery was different, and I'm not going to go into that now, but slavery was different. When we think slavery, we think American slavery, where people were stolen from their homes and bought and sold and treated as property. And slavery in the Bible was something that a person voluntarily put themselves into. It was more like indentured servitude for a time to get out of debt often. Or to provide for their family. And slaves were sometimes teachers and other things. Now, were some slaves mistreated? Of course. People mistreat people. But it isn't the same thing. So he said, "Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever, but the son remains forever. So if the son sets you free, you will be free indeed." So this practice was that if a person had slaves, when that slave owner died, his son or sons had the authority to free those slaves. No one else had that authority. So he's saying, "I am the Son of God, and if the son of you are a slave to sin, and you will be a slave to sin unless the Son, the Father, the Son of the Father, sets them free." And so, if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. Jesus had just given them the truth that he could make them free. And they knew that they're, well, let's say this one. Let's ask this first. What's obviously wrong that they're saying? Yeah.
That they were never,
yeah.
They were never enslaved.
Were they enslaved?
In Egypt.
In Egypt. What else?
Literally every other time that people went astray.
Yeah, they've been
like a lot.
The Assyrians came and took. The Babylonians came and took. Right? And who's ruling them right now?
The Romans.
The Romans. But we've never been slaves. How? Now that's ignorance, right? Yeah, and it is. It is. So they had been slaves in Egypt, and they had been slaves to the Babylonians, and to the Persians and to the Assyrians after, or not the Persians, the Babylonians and then the Persians and then also the Assyrians. So, and they were currently in bondage to Rome. And that's the way sin is. Sin blinds us to our own bondage too. I think I've mentioned before someone that is not in, that I'm loosely related to from marriage. I don't want to name names or give the exact relation because this is on YouTube. But he has been a slave to drugs since high school. He is now probably 70, 71 years old, and still is. And if you ask him, he has made a shambles out of every relationship he's ever had. His children won't have anything to do with him. They will not allow him to see his grandchildren. It's a sad, sad thing, and everything, all of it, is everybody else's fault, not his. He's fine. Everybody else's fault. That's what sin does. Sin makes us blind to our own sin, blind to our own need, and it is, it's done. It's absolutely done. And then in verse 36, we see, so if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. Jesus is saying that the only way for us to become free from that bondage of sin is Him, is through Him. So Satan always has a counterfeit of something good of God. He takes something good of God and he twists it and he offers it, and people take the bait. And it's never what God is. The joy of the Lord is my strength, right? And that's something that's a good gift from God. But sometimes we want to get joy in something that is sin. And Satan twists it and says, this will make you happy. Take these pills, you won't be sad anymore. And I'm talking about like illegal drugs, not drugs for their well-being. And they begin to believe that. And he twists it. And it only leads to more bondage. So they answered him, Abraham is our father. Jesus said to them, if you were Abraham's children, you would be doing the works Abraham did. But now you seek to kill me, a man who has told you the truth that I heard from God. This is not what Abraham did. You are doing the works your father did. They said to him, we were not born of sexual immorality. We have one Father, even God. Jesus said to them, if God were your Father, you would love me. For I came from God, and I am here. I came not of my own accord, but He sent me. Why do you not understand what I say? It is because you cannot bear to hear my word. You are of your father, the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires. What are you saying to them? It's calling the spawn of Satan. He was a murderer from the beginning, and he does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his own of his own character. Other versions say his native language. For he is a liar, and he's the father of lies. But because I tell you the truth, you do not believe me. Which one of you convicts me of sin? If I tell the truth, why do you not believe me? Whoever is of God hears the words of God. The reason you do not hear them is that you are not of God. This would have been offensive to the highest degree. Now, I'm going to give you the shorthand version, okay? So the people say, the Pharisees say, Abraham's our daddy. I call this, who's your daddy? Okay, so Abraham is our daddy. And Jesus says, no, if he were, you wouldn't want to kill me. You're acting like your true father. And then they say, our true father is God. God is our true father. And he says, he can't be. If he were, you'd love me. I came from him. Your daddy's the devil. And he's a liar, just like you are. You're just like your daddy. You're liars. You don't know God, and that's why you don't believe in me. Do you see why they were offended? Of course they were offended. If I said all of that to you, you would be offended. And you should be offended. Let me see. Okay, we've got just one little bit more, and then we'll rest for today. So remember that they were ignorant of their history. And then they say this in verse 48. The Jews answered him, "Are we not right in saying that you are a Samaritan and have a demon?" Now, to call someone a Samaritan in those days was the ultimate put down. It was like the worst thing. Like in your head right now, without thinking something you shouldn't think, what would be like a horrible put down? Like what could someone say to you that would just be awful? That's it. The Samaritans were hated. And then they will accuse him of demon possession. And they're going to do that again. So they're saying, you're crazy and you're worthless, basically. So they were ignorant of his character. They were also ignorant of his greatness. He says this, Jesus answered, "I do not have a demon, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. Yet I do not seek my own glory. There is one who seeks it. So there's one who seeks Jesus' glory, meaning the Father, and he is the judge. Truly, truly, I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he will never see death." The Jews said to him, "Now we know that you have a demon. Abraham died, as did the prophets. Yet you say, if anyone keeps my word, he will never taste death. Are you greater than our father Abraham, who died?" And the assumed answer is, heck no, no way. There's no way. And the prophets who died, who do you make yourself out to be? And so they are ignorant of his greatness. I should have there. Jesus said that that one who obeyed his words would never see death. And this statement just put them over the edge. Even Abraham died, and he's greater than anyone. And so how can you say such a thing? They didn't realize that Jesus existed long before Abraham did. Jesus is eternal, and they did not realize that. And then he goes on. Yeah, good. So they're also ignorant of his eternality. His eternality. I'm reading more than the curriculum said. We need to have the concept. Jesus answered them, "If I glorify myself, my word is nothing. It is my Father who glorifies me, of whom you say he is our God. But you have not known him. I know him. If I were to say that I do not know him, I would be a liar like you. But I do know him, and I keep his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day. He saw it and was glad." So the Jews said to him, "You are not yet 50 years old. How have you seen Abraham?" So I think they thought that now they could expose Jesus, because this is a crazy thing that he just said. It's a foolish thing that he said. He knew Abraham, who had lived like hundreds and hundreds of years before this happened. And so he's they say, "You're not even 50 years old. How could you have lived hundreds and hundreds of years ago?" And this is when Jesus will say, "Before Abraham was, I am." And that part is going to take some time. So we are going to wait for that tomorrow. And we'll stop here for today. And we'll have the rest of the hour.